All right. Let's see if I can get this moving in the right direction. There we go. So this is our 20th anniversary of the ITRC data breach report. All started with California with the world's first data breach notice law, passed in 2002, effective in 2003, but it took really until 2005 for everybody to know that it was there and began to actually report under it. So first of all, who is the ITRC? For those of you who are unaware of us, this is our new Shakespearean vision and mission. We have embraced the concept that brevity is the soul of wit. And so now our vision is a world where nobody can use my identity but me. Pretty simple statement. Very, very visionary, very lofty. And then, of course, what we actually do in our mission is to prevent and reduce the impact of identity theft, scams, and fraud. What does that mean? Well, we provide free assistance to victims of identity crimes. We've been doing that for 26 years now. We also have training tools and due diligence tools for businesses, and we track data breaches. And we also do other kind of research on the trends on anything involving identity theft, identity scams, and identity fraud, which is what we're going to talk about now. So the key findings from this year, I know you're all shocked, compromises set a new record in the last year. But the actual number of breach notices, which does not equal one-to-one to individuals, but the number of breach notices actually went down last year. Supply chain attacks kind of rebounded in an interesting way, while ransomware went down in an interesting way. But transparency and data breach notices, that is so last decade. We are continuing to see a drop in the amount of actionable information in the actual data breach notices. And then it's time to pay your cyber tax. We'll explain what that means in a minute. We also did something this year that we have not done before, which is we actually surveyed 1,000 individuals about their experience when they received a data breach notice. And so we found some interesting things. First of all, we get to notify people again and again and again and again. But the people are actually paying attention to those notices in ways we didn't really expect them to, because we've all talked about the concept of breach fatigue. They are actually paying attention, not only to adjust their actions and their behaviors, but also they're paying attention to what's happening to their information post breach notice. That is something that we did not really know they were doing, but they are actually paying a lot of attention to that. I'm only going to focus on 3 parts of this. You'll all get copies of the report sent to you. It's electronic, so I can't say it's a big, thick report, but there's a lot of pages, and there's a lot of information in this report. So I do hope you'll have a chance to peruse it. But I'm going to focus on 3 things this morning. When we talk about the state of more, there are more breaches. 3,322 is the official count of publicly reported data breaches last year. Now, the number of individual breach notices, though, dropped. Even though we have more breaches reported, we have breach notices going down. That is a phenomena of 2 things. One, the year before, we had huge mega breaches. You may remember we had AT&T, we had Ticketmaster, we had Advanced Auto Parts, we had the United Healthcare. So we had these mega breaches that impact hundreds of millions of breaches being issued. We didn't have that this year. So by default, the number went down year over year, but it is also down overall. This takes us to a number that's equivalent to 2014, which was before all the states had actually adopted data breach notice laws. It is the lowest since all 50 states, the territories, and DC adopted a law. That would have been in 2018. So the number of breach notices is actually down. When you look at how those notices break out, the vast majority, no surprise, are related to cyber attacks. And within that, it's primarily phishing. And this is where it gets interesting around when you start talking about supply chain attacks, which is the far right of the screen. that is an increase in the number of individual companies who are impacted by supply chain attacks. Ransomware attacks down. Why is all of this happening? Why are we having this flux? And why are we having the reduction in the number of data breach notices to individuals? It's because of the technology and the tactics that the bad guys are using now. They're far more targeted than they have been. Now they're using AI to even refine those targets. So, excuse me. So we'll talk about in a minute, a little bit more about why some of this is happening. But at the top line, it is because they're using the same technology tools we're using, but they're using them in different ways to actually do bad things. But then you also see we still can break out between there's still system and human errors. They're just things happen sometimes. And then physical attacks, still a very low number, but we did see a huge surge on a relative basis in skimming attacks. We haven't seen skimming attacks in anything other than single digits in years. And then in the last year, we saw a big jump in skimming attacks, primarily using newer technology skimmers, the Bluetooth skimmers, and some other kind of tools like that. Now, there may be overall fewer breach notices, but there are more notices per person. So very few people only get one. The largest plurality is people who get 3 to 5. That's 40% of this pool of the 1,000 people that we talked to had they received a data breach notice. 80% of the people said, yes, I have. 14%, no, I didn't. 6 couldn't remember. So we do know that more people are being impacted multiple times, even if the overall number might be down a little bit. Let's talk about the effectiveness, though, of these breach notices. So in preparation for all of this, I went back and dug through the Wayback Machine and other sources, including maybe a little bit of AI, multiple AIs, just to make sure they were all fighting the same thing. That's, oh, yeah, that must be real. So the things we have to do now. Why did California pass a data breach law in 2000? So this is from a Judiciary Committee hearing in the Senate. The law was authored by Senator, at that time, Senator Steve Peace from San Diego, whose other claim to fame is as the producer of that epic film that I'm sure you're all very familiar with, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. I'm not making this up, it's real. Look it up on IMDb, the greatest app in the world. But here's what the statement that came out of the Senate Judiciary Committee that day in 2022 was, this bill removes the veil of secrecy and ensures individuals can take steps to protect themselves. Remember that statement. 70% of the data breach notices issued last year had no actionable information. If you're talking about one that was related to a cyber attack, that number goes up to 73% of data breach notices had no actionable information. There was a breach. Here's some credit monitoring. Thank you very much. That's essentially it. The why that is a variety of reasons. Number one, as we all know, we have 50 different data breach laws, plus the District of Columbia, plus the territories. All of them have a different definition of PII. All of them have a different threshold for the number of people impacted. All of them have a different remediation scheme, yada, 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 yada. They're all different. So what has happened is, thanks to several court cases at the federal level, courts have said, if you don't have this fact set, if you don't have this type of information, you do not have standing to sue. So reasonable reaction to the defense bar is, don't give anybody any more information than you absolutely have to, because otherwise you're giving a roadmap to discovery. So what do? We have data breach notices with very little information because the state laws don't require it, or they don't require it on a uniform basis. So we have less information at a time when we have more notices multiple notices going to people, and more data breaches per year. If we look around the world at the other parts of regions and countries who have similar requirements in their law, we are way out of sync. We have about nine and a half data breach notices per day based on 2025. If you look at the EU as a region, under the GDPR, a little bit different scheme, but the criteria for reporting is essentially the same. So the first step in the EU is you must report to the data authority in your country. Okay, that's 443 a day. 9 a day in the US, 443 a day in the EU. Well, then you say, but that's to the Data Protection Authority. That's correct. And they will tell you 80% of those notices never make it to the consumer. That it's a joint decision between the organization that has been breached, the Data Protection Authority, they decide, yes, the consumer needs to be told of this. When you break it down to that, you're now at 43 per day compared to our 9.5 per day. Only in Australia do they have fewer data breach notices per day than we do. And that's because there's only 27 million of them in Australia. So if you were to size up their population to meet ours, they would still be beating us at about 22 to 25 data breach notices per day. Are we really having that fewer number of data breaches? The answer to that, of course, is no. But we have a regulatory scheme that prevents information getting into the hands of both businesses and individuals so they can protect themselves. So what is the impact of all of this? Oh, look, more irony. Highlight again, this one is from the floor analysis in the Assembly in California in 2002, that organizations will be compelled to improve their data management to avoid the significant costs and negative publicity associated with the public notice. And there's some other comments in about that they have been absorbing these costs heretofore as a means of keeping the information from getting out into the public. For the first time last year, when we surveyed small businesses, when we asked, how do you pay for the cost of recovering from a data breach or a cyber attack or both? And for the first time, 38%, almost 39% said, we raised prices. So they had been historically using cash reserves, insurance proceeds, never price increases. We had never seen that before. And then last year, up pops up, more than 38%. So they're raising prices. That contributes to inflation. And that also increases the cost, not just for the direct customers, but also the other vendors that they rely on. So it's the knock-on effect that we see anytime this kind of circumstance exists. So the concept now we've established of why did we have data breach notices? It would be to give the incentive to avoid the cost and keep it away from consumers and to give consumers more information. We have now said neither one of those are in play today. Victims, another impact here, victims are actually noticing. They're paying attention for the first time in ways we've never seen them do to what happens once they get a data breach notice. Historically, it's been, oh, I got a data breach notice, trash can. Or, it's another data breach notice, I didn't even open it. Now, we don't see that. There was 0% of people who responded to this survey said if they received a data breach notice, 0 said they did not read it. So they are paying attention to these notices now in ways they have not. And they're looking for what's happening to them after that fact. And you now see the percentages here of the kind of knock-on effect that they're finding. Now, maybe some of this is not real. Maybe it really isn't related to maybe that data breach, but I can guarantee it is related to some data breach because we've all been the victim of so many over time. But they're noticing an uptick in phishing. They're noticing the uptick in spam, all the way down to new account fraud, account takeover, et cetera. So they are paying attention to what is happening as a result of receiving that data breach notice. That time lag too is closing. We used to tell people after a data breach, it might be a year or two. They would sit on the data. Remember those days? We'd say they sit on the data for a while and then they'll do something with it later. So, you can't connect the dots. They don't sit on it anymore. We're seeing data go into use within hours to days. So they are paying attention in ways they have not. Okay, and they're acting. So these are the on the left side of the screen is what actions people were taking before. So a lot of these, before they received the breach notice, a lot of these are all the things we tell people they should be doing, right? You should have strong, unique passwords. You should use MFA. You should have a pass key. Almost half, 49%, already have set up a pass key. You should freeze your credit. That number's way too low, by the way. Only 42% saying they freeze their credit. The single most effective thing you can do to protect your identity information is freeze your credit if you want to stop something bad from happening. But only 42% of the people said they actually did it. 41% are using a password manager. And you see all the information. Interesting part about now pop up here saying, I'm reducing the amount of information I put on the social media platforms. So almost a third, which is a significant finding this year. But now look at what to do after. Pass keys again. So the half of the people who didn't have a pass key before, half of them went and set up a pass key. So that's good. The more pass keys we get, the better off we're all going to be. And you see all the changes. So we're seeing people take significant actions pre and post data breach notice. So what's next? Well, the victims tell us exactly what they want. They're saying to us that the information, the notice itself, is helpful for the most part, but it's not helpful enough. And there's not enough information in the data breach notices to suit their preferences. And so what we find are here, what would you like to see? Specifics about the data. What data? What specific data of mine? Not the generic category. It was sensitive information. No, I want to know what the information was. Sometimes that's difficult to do on the front end when you're still doing the forensics investigation. But at some point, you're going to know, and you should be telling people because that's what they want to hear. They want it in plain language. They don't want, probably should admit this, but I'm going to anyway. There are paragraphs in data breach notices today that I wrote in 2005 in the very first nationally issued data breach notice. If you're using something I wrote 20 years ago, you are lazy. So we have a roadmap here of what people say they want and need to feel like they are being treated with respect and dignity, and that their needs to protect themselves are being met. What we have done has gotten us to where we are. Raise your hand if you're happy with where we are. Okay, one person. That is a continuous trend line up. And that's, we've been fighting headwinds all along. I appreciate it. I understand it. We've had the introduction of high capacity databases since 2005. We've had high-speed internet become not quite universal, but it's readily available in most places. Everything we have is software driven. My toothbrush is software driven. The convenience over security mentality is the norm today. We've had low-cost malware kits introduced that require not only low cost, but no skill, and yet can be high impact in some kind of attack. Now, increased automation, and certainly now the introduction of artificial intelligence. That trend line is going up, and there is nothing to stop it from continuing to going up that's on the horizon right now. And the legal framework that we're still operating under of 50 states, the territories, and DC, that has not changed significantly either. We've tweaked the definition. We've gone from reasonable delay to maybe it's a defined delay to best practice to whatever. It is still no meaningful changes have been made on this part of identity protection in the 20 years since these were adopted. So we've got a legal framework that doesn't work. We've got a technology framework that can't slow things down. So now we're at a point where we have to start asking ourselves some legitimate and serious questions. And I don't pretend to have the answers, but I do have the questions. And I have thoughts, but again, I don't have the answers. It's going to take all of us working together. Every sector, every industry, every person who cares about this, we have to start the conversation, and we need to start it soon, because otherwise we're just going to get more of what we've got. What is the purpose of a data breach notice today? What is it really intended to do? What is the value of that? What does it do to improve the risk profile of an individual or a company based on using the same model we have today? That doesn't mean we have to use the same model going forward. There are different ways we can notify people. There's a lot more information we can give people. There are recommendations that are meaningful we can give people beyond call this 800 number to accept your free credit reporting. What's the proper balance between convenience and security? This is where my boss over here is going to stand up and cheer. Eva has been talking about this now for at least the last 5 years. Where is the harm in high value transaction? The transaction speed being reduced from milliseconds to maybe seconds, heaven forbid minutes, but in a way that actually contributes to security to reduce fraud, identity theft, and scams. What's the right balance? What are we prepared to do, if anything, to avoid living in a world where we just see more and more and more data breaches and data compromises, which put people and businesses at risk? And maybe we are. Maybe we just say there is a level of this that we're willing to accept, and then we can quit worrying about all this other stuff. But I don't think that's where we are, and I don't think that's where we want to be. And then finally, particularly for the people in this room, what's the impact on identity verification? If we continue to compromise personal information year after year after year after year, how can we have an identity process? How can we have an identity environment that is almost from the inception going to be challenged to prove a person is who they say they are? Because the basis of all of our identities start with data today. So we have to tackle these questions.